So I am a mom and a teacher, a part-time teacher, at least before COVID happened.
Mm.
And I'm a writer. I used to act, and I also used to volunteer with marine mammals in an aquarium on Sundays. I've done a lot of different jobs. I used to think I wanted to work with animals, and then I decided I wanted to work on stage. So I acted in New York and LA. And then after I had my daughter, we moved to Seattle, and that's where I live now. It's the place I've lived the longest in my entire life. I moved around more as a kid. And then after I had my second child, I started writing. And so I started writing short fiction, taking classes, and publishing short fiction, short stories. And then I switched over to some nonfiction and essays, which led me to start writing memoir and get my master's in fine arts at Pacific University, where I finished a couple of years ago and had a thesis, which is the memoir that is coming out this May, called When She Comes Back. And it's a memoir about growing up waiting for my mom to come back after following a guru.
Mm.
And the guru is the guru that was featured in the docuseries Wild Wild Country, which was Netflix a couple of years ago. And that's Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who I knew of growing up, but a lot of people I knew didn't know. But I was familiar with him. And so these days, when people hear about my story, they'll say the Wild Wild Country guy. And so that's coming out on Mother's Day because my mom and I actually reconciled. And then the other part of my life right now is that I have a podcast. It's right behind me, the little image there. It's called And Then Everything Changed. And it is a weekly podcast on all platforms where I interview people about really pivotal moments in their life and decisions they feel define them and have changed the way they think and the way they act and their relationships. And so I've been doing that a little bit more than a year. And I've tried to cover social justice issues and addiction and abuse and parenting and all kinds of different issues that
Mm.
people maybe want to take a deep dive into.
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow, that's
that was a
amazing.
long answer.
That's all good. So
Mhm.
you mentioned a little bit about your mom following a cult guru. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I'm sorry, I hear my dogs in the background. I hope you don't hear them. My mom first left our family. It's kind of a long story, but oh well, it
Mm.
is a long story. I wrote a book about it and I write a lot of essays about it. But essentially, I was born on a kibbutz in Israel, which, if you haven't heard of a kibbutz before, it's sort of a communal socialist type of work farm. These days, they're a lot more capitalist, but
Mm.
my parents left New York. They're New York Jews, and they married really young on the kibbutz, and they wanted to start a new life. They wanted to have sort of a pioneering experience in Israel. And
Mhm.
they ended up on a kibbutz, and everything was provided. In turn, they worked. My father worked the fields and the cow, he was a dairy farmer. My mom worked in the kitchen, and everything was secure. And then when they moved to the States so he could get his master's, things
Mm.
kind of fell apart and he left. And then a year later, she wanted to leave. And so she went to India to follow this guru. And we went to my father's, my sister and I. And she just stayed away for longer than she had intended.
Mm.
And then when she came back eventually, she ended up leaving again when I was 12.
Mm.
So the book is really about that. And I think it's also about coming to grips with this idea that, for me at least, having taught children, having been a mom, having been a kid, and just being strongly interested in human relationships, I really feel like as a child, often we don't have words for our experience, or we don't have the space or the time or the vulnerability to really entertain how we're
Mm.
feeling, or we learn that when we
Mhm.
do feel strongly, it might not be welcome. There may not be time for it, or it may not even help us surviving.
Mm.
And so there's this healing quality to writing your story when you get older and being able to look at it from a safe distance. That is something I come back to again and again. And I feel really strongly that to be able to give your story shape and words in the perspective that you now have can be very helpful, not only to you, but to others who might feel
Mhm.
seen by your story.
Mhm. You're right. What I normally see is we do not have words for what we're experiencing as a kid. Instead, what we do is we put these kind of goggles on, and that's how we interact in
Yeah.
life, right? Like your
Yeah.
grandma says a certain thing, and you make that mean, oh, I'm useless. Right, but
Yes.
really
Yes.
your feelings were hurt. That's what happened, but you made it mean
Yes.
something else.
Well, there's also those rules in a family, which I think most people are familiar with. I mean, there probably are some very clear cut families out there, but I don't know friends who are from too many of them. And the more people I talk to for the podcast, the more writers and artists I meet, the more everyone I meet, the more I realize we all have these experiences that shape us. And I think part of writing it down or telling our story is an effort maybe to not keep reliving the past. Well, it's counterintuitive because we're reliving the past by telling the story, but we're reshaping the past into a way that we understand and that can actually maybe heal a little bit. And that's
Yeah.
part of, I really feel stories can heal. And that's part of my tagline for the show. And for anyone who ever thinks, I don't know why my story is important or why should I add my voice? I firmly believe that it's important to get your story out there and to hear it. I mean, I'm a juror for the Scholastic Writing Awards right now. It's really lovely. I'm just reading on my own time stories submitted by students, 11th grade, 10th grade, anonymously, so I
Mhm.
can pick out the ones that might get a special mention or just tell them how they did. And even during this year of fires in the Bay Area, during the pandemic, during all the administration's issues that we've dealt with in this country, these children, these young adults are writing their stories. And I have so much hope now because if
Mhm.
people can express themselves, if they feel the need and the place to express themselves,
Mhm.
then I don't think all is lost.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain freedom when someone can actually say,
Yeah.
like how they feel, or just you in general, how are you feeling today? And you not just going reverting into good, like actually
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, I'm feeling kind of off, and that there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that, you were waiting for your mom to come back. How did that affect you? How did you see that manifest? How did that manifest into your interactions with people as an adult?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think that's the other part of our past is that we do
Mhm.
keep reliving them. I really had to learn that everybody wasn't going to leave and that I could trust people and that I wasn't an unlovable person.
Mhm.
I think when you have parental distance or any kind of leaving on either of your caretakers or your only caretaker or a grandparent, whoever it is, that kind of emotional distance can really give you a message about yourself, just like
Mhm.
what you were saying. And so, I mean, I always wanted to be a mom and I knew I could do it. And both me and my sibling were pretty good moms. But being a partner in a relationship is quite a different thing when
Mhm.
you grow up feeling like maybe you're leavable. So I had to kind of work through that. And that takes, and work is the word. I mean, anyone who's been through an emotional
Mhm.
experience or a change in their life like this, whether it's divorce or childhood issues or recovery, anything, those are kind of the people that come onto my show. They sort of have walked that path and they need to talk about it. They want to share that it's possible to survive. And so I
Mhm.
did that work. I'm always still catching myself. I have to do that work on a daily basis. And I was able to come out of that pattern.
Mhm.
And that's part of the reason I write my story and I do the podcast is because I really want people to understand you can change. You can stay who you are, but you can change the ways you behave so that you can have a better life.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I want to emphasize here is that I know when I started examining my life, my feelings, my emotions, my actions, I thought that, okay, if I fix it, it will all disappear and I'll
Mm.
just be this happy bouncing around. But no, the work never stops.
Yeah.
The way you wound up being still flares up, and you have to
Yes.
keep it will never disappear. You just get a better control of it, and you just notice it.
It's like a knee jerk.
Yeah.
It's a knee jerk. But I think I was really just, there's been a lot of buzz in my little circle on Instagram and Facebook lately about, and this isn't a new idea, but about that idea that if you don't mention something or don't talk about it, it doesn't go away. It gets bigger. If you not mentioning or addressing something doesn't actually work. It actually can grow and become, the unnameable can actually become more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what you're saying is to even notice it takes bravery, I mean, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and to catch yourself and to even be able to apologize for something. Someone just wrote to me yesterday because they caught themselves in something. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, thank you. Thank you for noticing it. And I don't want people to feel regretful. I was just talking to friends about this around a fire 6 feet away. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I I hate that feeling of regret. I mean, I hate grief. Grief is a hard emotion,
Yeah.
but that sense of regret you have when you feel something is irrevocable is not something I want anyone to feel. So if someone can go back and just apologize or notice something with someone they love and say, I could have done better, that goes
Mm-hmm.
a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sets an example as well because you created that space of being
Yeah.
open and self-expressed. So the other person in turn will also start expressing. So you're
Yes.
setting that example. So
I
yeah.
agree. I agree with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you and your mom have reconciled. So what
Yeah.
perspective did you have to give up and or what perspective did you have to gain in order for that to happen?
Oh, such good questions. I appreciate those. I think it's complicated, and I have tried to narrow it down a little bit because I know it's an interesting finale to a story, and I've tried to pin it down. But I think one thing at work, and not the only thing, is that I had to realize that who I was personally didn't have that much to do with what her actions were. That they
Mm,
said more about her than they said about me. um, I think if you think you're less than or you blame yourself, it can be really hard to open up some of that compassion or to have forgiveness. But because I came to understand in part that this was my mom's experience, this was my father's experience when he left, because he left first. They only had the tools they had at the time, and they regret it too, right? And that's
mm,
what I'm talking about, regret. So do I want to keep on having someone feel regretful and sorry for the way they behaved decades ago? No, I mean, I don't want to feel that way. And do I think I was a terrible child or the most annoying person ever? I did for a long time, subconsciously. And of course, those habits can still kick in sometimes if I'm feeling vulnerable. But I came to understand in part that it wasn't me, that it was them. And also, something I just, I don't really want to live in a lot of anger. I mean, I'm sure I have anger. I'm sure I get angry. I'm sure my family will say, "Oh, you have anger." But
mm.
like, I don't think that's my first emotion. It's not my first go to. So maybe it has to do with temperament, luck, openness, time, something like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. It's one of the best things that you could ever understand. Once you understand that other people's actions are a reflection of what's going on inside of them and nothing to do
Yes.
with you, you become more understanding. Right? Like for
Yes.
example, I was turning right somewhere and the guy behind me, I didn't, like was like incessantly so angry, honking, and I'm like, wow. In the beginning, I'm like, what do you want? And then after that, I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, for someone to be that worked up over turning right, a
Yes.
lot must be going on.
Yes, you're so right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's not a condescension. It's not like you're feeling like, oh,
Hmm.
bless your heart. Because when it happens to me, sometimes I do feel like I'm in my more like, steady and centered moments,
Hmm.
which it sounds like you were in this case, because the first instinct is to protect and to lash out, I think.
Hmm.
But
Yes.
I feel like, wow, I'm so sorry that they're so stressed out. And it's not a
No,
snotty
it's
knee jerk.
no.
It's really comes from like a compassionate place of like, wow, your experience is so different from what I'm doing right now. I'm just
Hmm.
driving, I'm just doing
Yeah.
my thing, but you're so
Yeah.
angry at me. And so
Yeah.
then you realize there's compassion for them and where they are, and you hope that they feel better.
Hmm.
I mean, you don't
Yeah.
want to get hurt, but you hope they feel
Yeah.
better.
Honestly, at that time, that very moment I was turning right, I was thinking about potato chips and popcorn. That's what I was thinking about. And he's so
That sounds
angry. And
like
then,
me.
yeah.
I love potato chips and popcorn.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. And he's so angry. And you're right. It's not about being condescending. I'm like, I wish you peace. I really mean it.
Yes.
I wish you peace.
Yes. But the irony, of course, is that we all have to get to a place of, well, when I'm feeling more balanced and centered, I can let those thoughts in. But when you
Hmm.
don't feel that way, you
No,
can't. And that's why
no.
things escalate, right? And that's
Yeah.
why, like, the more you notice the good things you are able to do, and when people do well, like, it's also interesting because if you notice someone snap at you or if someone says something that seems very defensive, once you understand it's so much more about them than
Hmm.
you really can kind of drift up a little bit. And I'm not talking about being like Zen like and removed from everything and not engaged in your friendships
Hmm.
and relationships. That's not what I'm talking about. But instead of being like, "Rah," like I'm gonna get back at you for saying that, you sort of step back and realize, oh wow, they're just having a hard moment. And
Hmm.
I don't have to catch that. I don't have to take the
Yeah.
bait.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so you mentioned you have kids.
Yeah.
You have two amazing kids. So
Teenagers.
teenagers now. Wow.
Yeah.
So, being a child of divorce plus your mom leaving, how did that manifest in your own parenting?
Well, I probably am a little indulgent. I think I'm a
Mm.
little soft on them. I think I probably I mean, I still unload their laundry baskets sometimes and I'll still say, "Does anyone want fruit?" And they're 13 and 15, or they'll call from their room, "Can I have an apple?" And so I'll go and cut the apple. I don't really need to put my foot down and say, "Get your own fruit."
Mhm.
Like these days, if my teenager is talking to me and wants me to hang out with them, I'm all in. I'm just happy that they're like friendly and that they want to spend time with me. But yeah, I think I was probably indulgent. I can tell from the look on my father's face on some dinner nights that, he used to think I was probably
Yeah.
like giving in too soon. And my husband will sometimes kindly say to me over the years, he'd say, you're not your parents. You don't have to worry about that. You're a good
Mhm.
mom, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it's sort of that mental gymnastics, a little bit of a check in. And sometimes it's hard to trust your instincts. I think
Mhm.
if you've had a really powerful parent in your life, a caretaker who had great boundaries and who really put you first, but always had their own life and knew that you were a kid, maybe you're more well prepared for something like that. For
Mhm.
me, it always is a little bit of a dance, a little bit of an overthink, a little bit of a wonder if I'm doing this something right. But as time goes by, I get more confident. And now we've had our family together in this form for so long now that we feel, and COVID, I have to say, like Judith, I know this is maybe not a popular opinion, but for our family, we kind of got closer because
Mhm.
we're all home. And I know that, COVID has been a really difficult time for domestic violence and for victims. And I don't by any means ignore that. Just for our family, I feel like something happened in which our kids saw that, like, we were okay, like we are not a bad couple actually, and that we get along, and we've spent some more time with them in ways, and I'm grateful for it in that sense.
Wow, that's awesome. So, how did vulnerability help with with your interaction with your family and your kids? Because I know it's one of the things, right? Like I was talking to my cousin earlier this year, and she's so mad because her mom never said "I'm proud of you," or her mom never
Mm,
says "I love you," and I'm like,
mhm.
well, yeah, that sucks. But then when I went over and I had the conversation with my aunt, she's like, well, how does she not know? I tried to show it. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not gonna be
Right.
in between. I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, so when you say vulnerability, well, that
Mhm.
made me think about, in that anecdote you just shared, which I know you're just sharing it, but
Mhm.
like that love language for your cousin was your cousin,
Mhm.
right? Like the
Mhm.
love language is maybe words and not
Mhm.
just, acts of service. Like maybe she needed to actually hear it.
Mhm.
So vulnerability, I think that I know that when I'm getting edgy or testy, like that has to do with my feeling out of
Mhm.
control and that I haven't finished something, and I have to apologize if I lash out. And it
Mhm.
happened not too long ago. I think it was just 2 or 3 days ago where I was snotty, and I was being a whiner and I was snotty. And then I just had to say to my husband, "I'm really sorry." I said, I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't nice. And of
Mhm.
course it's hard to swallow your pride and to be vulnerable, but honestly, people love it. And it works
Mhm.
so well. And it's not a line. If you really are there and being vulnerable, just like Brene Brown says, it's a very powerful thing. It's not a weak thing. And it takes
Mhm.
courage to be vulnerable. It really does, to stand there, metaphorically speaking, with no armor and just say, "This is it. Like, this is what I got." But hopefully you've picked people in your life who do love you and who you can
Mhm.
believe in, who won't hurt you when you're being vulnerable. And
Yeah.
if they do, well, then who have you picked?
Yeah. That's awesome. So, what's a question you wish more people asked about examining their life?
Hmm. Wow. You're good at, you got the really good questions. I love them. I need to take a page out of your book for my podcast. I really like them. So I think that's a really good question. I feel like I would have so many to answer, but I would say
Mhm,
what people what I recommend based on my own experience that people could ask is to know that a lot of things, you know, okay, what is my fault? What is in my hands to change, and what
mhm,
is not for me to fix? I
mhm,
think, what can I actually control of in a healthy way, and uh, I should take, into my care to change, and
mm,
what is not anything that I have to do,
mm.
right? And that's sort of that balance between letting yourself off the hook for
Yeah.
things that are not your fault and not your responsibility, but also engaging with your instincts and yourself and saying, I could do better in this area. And that
Mhm,
takes a while. That takes a while. But I do think
mhm,
sometimes being calm and still and just letting emotions, come over you, and then getting your takeaway from them will
mhm.
help in that. And not maybe taking action too fast. In my younger
Yeah.
life, I took action right away about things. If I had an instinct, I would just jump on it. I would
Mm,
say things, I would do things, I would, follow up really quick on things. But sometimes it's okay. You can like breathe a little bit and give yourself a minute to think about what you really want to do.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So, actually, let's roll back a little bit. How did your journey to this all started? Like, you're like, okay,
Hmm.
it's when was the and then everything changed moment?
For
When
me,
was
right?
that? Yeah.
Well, I think, okay, so here's another thing. I think that when I realized that I could have a good life and I did not have to repeat my patterns anymore, and that even though it was hard and being vulnerable scared me, that I wasn't going to die from being vulnerable, that I could actually, stay put and really dig in. I think that's when I realized things, it didn't happen right away. I mean, it takes
Mhm,
time and belief, and you just have to stay put. Because I want to just crumple under the weight of what I was worried about and what I didn't think I could do. But then I stayed put as much as I didn't want to. I realized, basically, it's cliched, but wherever you go, there you are. And if I didn't deal with it, it was going to just come back again and again
mhm,
and again in my life, in my relationships. And so I guess I did some work, and then I really, like, looked at myself straight in the eye. And the other idea too is that if you've been hurt in your life, if you've been a victim in some ways, that doesn't mean that you are immune or unable to hurt other people.
mhm,
I think that that is something that happens. We can think we're so innocent, or we're incapable of hurting anyone because we're the injured party, but we really can hurt other people. And so until we address where we've been hurt and what we need to change or look at, we may not we may not protect other people from ourselves.
mhm,
So that's kind of where my aha was. And it's slow. Like I said, these things didn't happen
mhm,
overnight. But then I realized, okay. And part of the inspiration for the podcast title as well is that, having worked with story now and writing and reading stories and editing things for about 10 years,
mhm,
I've come to see, I know life is not neat like a story or a movie. It's not.
mhm,
But that's part of what we like about movies and stories, is that they kind of take these messy lives of ours and put them in some sort of order that our human minds want to understand better. And so if you look at your life in these like sections, like, that's kind of like what a memoir is. It's a section of time. It's not your whole life.
mhm.
That's a biography or an
Yeah.
autobiography. But if you say, oh wow, this is a time period in which I learned that this relationship was not what I thought it was, or this is a time when I realized, no, I didn't really want to go to school for that, that kind of thing, then you can kind of frame it in an and then everything changed moment. And that's what I try to encourage my guests to do, which is sort of, it's not that everything changed in a moment. It's just that you realized
Mhm,
something that you never knew before, and it changed your trajectory.
mhm. Wow,
Yeah.
that is awesome. You're right, like we get the whole transformation thing packaged in a
Hmm.
neat hour and a half to 2 hour movie, but it never happens like that.
No, but I do think that's why people like
Yeah.
it, because we like to create order out of chaos, right? We want to know
Correct.
that there's a reason for things and things will change if we try
Mhm.
them. I mean, that's why we love those stories, of the
Mhm.
protagonist.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
let's get imaginative here for a bit. So imagine if I snap my fingers right now, magic will sprinkle all over our computers. Your microphone will suddenly, will be heard by everyone around the world, and everything they hear, they will actually hear, not just hear, but hear. Um,
Hmm.
y- you know what I mean when I say that, right? Like they'll actually
Yes.
hear and start implementing. What will be your parting piece of guidance for them?
Oh my gosh. I would say, well, it sounds so silly, but kindness starts with yourself, and
Mm,
kindness for yourself will make you kinder to other people. And when people are kinder to other people, then you feel it too. So I just feel like empathy and compassion and kindness starts with ourselves. So
mm,
I think maybe the easiest way to digest that is give yourself a little bit of room and know that you are doing the best you can, but also try to do just a little bit better
mm.
when it comes to being empathetic.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, excuse me, Ronit, sorry.
You did
Yeah,
it great.
Ronit,
Yeah.
I would
Hmm.
like to acknowledge you for the stand that you are, for kindness, for empathy, for self-expression, for vulnerability. You're setting an amazing example, not just for everyone around us, but for the next generation. You're interacting with kids. So I'd like to acknowledge you for that and
Thank
thank you
you.
for that.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah, so what is the best way that we could connect with you, and how can we, our
Hmm.
listeners, listen to and then everything
Sure.
changed?
Okay, thank you so much. So the best way to find me is by going to my website, which is ronitplank.com. So it's RONIT like Timothy, and then plank, PLANK, like a piece of wood,
Mhm,
ronitplank.com. And you'll have a list of all my writing. My forthcoming book, When She Comes Back, is in pre-order right now. It's coming in May. That's a memoir.
mhm,
And also all my podcast episodes. And my podcast is available on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, Google, all the major ones, and most of the little ones. It's weekly, it's free, it's every Tuesday. And I try to keep my episodes about a half hour to 35 minutes to be conscious of time. And so go to and then everything changed podcast.com or atecpodcast.com. Go to ronitplank.com. Go to Ronit Plank on Instagram, on Facebook. I'm all over the place under my name. And I would love it if you are interested in learning more about the podcast, listening to it, subscribing. And if you like it, definitely leave a review because that helps other people find it.
mm.
Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. We will have all that in the show notes. Again, Ronit, thank you so much for coming in, hanging out with us. We love you,
Um,
we appreciate you, and I'm pretty sure there will be a part two because we barely scratched the surface here.
Judith, thank you so much for having me on. It was really fun to talk with you, and I really appreciate your questions.
Mm, thank
Yeah.
you. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
awesome.